We wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. This debt we pay to human guile. With torn and bleeding hearts we smile, and mouth with myriad subtleties. Why should the world be overwise in counting all our tears and sighs? Nay, let them only see us while we wear the mask. We smile, but O great Christ, our cries to thee from tortured souls arise. We sing, but oh, the clay is foul beneath our feet and long the mile. But let the world dream otherwise. We wear the mask.
Paul Laurence Dunbar was born in Dayton on June 27, 1872. He was the son of former slaves. His father, Joshua, had escaped from slavery before the Civil War by making his way to Canada via the Underground Railroad. When war broke out between the North and South, Joshua returned to the United States and enlisted in the 55th Regiment Massachusetts Volunteers, an all-black outfit. Young Paul was very proud of his father's military service, and he later wrote several poems celebrating the role of African-American soldiers in winning the Civil War and ending slavery.
They were comrades then and brothers. Are they more or less today? They were good to stop a bullet and to front the fearful fray. They were citizens and soldiers when rebellion raised its head. And the traits that made them worthy, those virtues are not dead. And their deeds shall find a record in the registry of fame, for their blood has cleansed completely every blot of slavery's shame. So all honor and all glory to those noble sons of Ham, the gallant colored soldiers who fought for Uncle Sam.
Paul's mother, Matilda, was the most important influence in his life. She met Joshua in Dayton after the war when she was a widow with 2 children from her previous marriage. Matilda and Joshua separated when Paul was a young boy. Joshua remained in Dayton and in contact with his son, but Matilda raised young Paul on her own, making many sacrifices so that he could attend high school during a period when few young people attained that level of education. Paul was the only African American in his class at Central High School, but he had many friends and excelled in literature. Orville Wright was a classmate of Dunbar's. Throughout his life, Dunbar was able to cross the color line of the day and establish friendships with people black and white. Paul had begun writing poems at a young age, and at Central High, he edited the school paper, was elected president of the literary club, and composed and presented the official class poem at graduation. For a short time, he even published a newspaper, The Tattler, that was aimed at the growing black community of Dayton. Dayton was a fast-growing, prosperous city in the early 1890s, but despite his education and obvious writing skills, Dunbar could not find any professional work with the city's newspapers or other businesses. The reason was simple. The people managing these businesses did not believe that African Americans were fit for such jobs. Dunbar finally took a low-paying job as an elevator boy at the Callahan Bank building downtown. Dunbar was discouraged, but he continued to work on his writing, occasionally publishing poems and short stories in newspapers around the country. He also gave public readings.
I've a humble little motto that is homely though it's true. Keep a plugging away. There'll be lots of sneers to swallow. There'll be lots of pain to bear. Keep a plugging away. If you've got your eyes on heaven, some bright day you'll wake up there. Keep a plugging away. Perseverance still is king. Time its sure reward will bring. Work and wait unwearying. Keep a plugging away.
Dunbar even managed to publish his first book of poems after he persuaded an official at Dayton's United Brethren Publishing Company to print the copies on credit. Dunbar managed to sell all 500 copies of Oak and Ivy and repay the company. Though he continued his job as an elevator operator, Dunbar's publications and public readings were gradually making others aware of his talent. The great abolitionist Frederick Douglass was an early admirer, and Dr. Henry Tobey of Toledo and other white Ohioans offered Dunbar financial support and other kinds of aid. But Dunbar's big break came when William Dean Howells, America's leading man of letters, reviewed his second book of poems. Howells, a native of Ohio himself, praised the young poet as a writer of great promise and the first black writer to effectively express the life of his people. The Howells Review made Dunbar famous almost overnight. A major publishing contract followed, and soon people across the country were buying his books. Dunbar became a celebrity, traveling across the country to read from his work. In 1897, he even made a speaking tour of England. More books followed. Aside from his poetry, Dunbar began publishing novels and short stories. He collaborated with composers on songs for the growing black theater. Dunbar faced a major problem as an artist. He was a professional writer producing work for a reading public that was largely white. Most white Americans at that time believed that African Americans were inherently inferior. Minstrel shows and popular fiction that portrayed black Americans as childlike comic figures who had been happy as slaves enjoyed great popularity. Sometimes Dunbar's poems, stories, and songs pandered to such prejudice and reinforced these stereotypes. But there was another, truer side to Dunbar. The strong pride that he felt as a black man in the struggle of his people shines through in many of his poems.
Be proud of my race, in mind and soul. Thy name is writ on glory's scroll in characters of fire. No other race, or white or black, when bound as thou wert to the rack, so seldom stoop to grieving. No other race, when free again, forgot the past, and proved them men so noble and forgiving. Go on and up, our souls and eyes shall follow thy continuous rise. Our ears shall list thy story, from bards who from thy root shall spring, and proudly tune their lyres to sing of Ethiopia's glory.
Dunbar's poems and stories also chronicled the everyday life of African Americans. His poems in black dialect, while sometimes humorous, presented black Americans as complex individuals in difficult situations who experienced the full range of human emotions.
Seen my lady home last night. Jump back, honey, jump back. Held her hand and squeezed it tight. Jump back, honey, jump back. Heard her sigh a little sigh, seen a light gleam from her eye, and a smile go flitting by. Jump back, honey, jump back. Put my arm round her waist. Jump back, honey, jump back. Raised her lips and took a taste. Jump back, honey, jump back. Love, honey, love me true. Love me well is I love you. And she answered, course I do. Jump back, honey, jump back.
Dunbar could not ignore the terrible injustices of his day. In the South, new laws robbed blacks of the vote and mandated segregation, and all over America lynchings and race riots were common. Dunbar was not afraid to speak out in protest against this oppression, which he did in a number of articles.
30 years ago, the American people told the Negro that he was a man with a man's full powers. They deemed it that important. They did what they have done few times in the history of the country. They wrote it down in their Constitution. And now they come with a shotgun in the South and sophistry in the North to prove to him that it was all wrong. For so long a time has the black man believed that he is an American citizen, that he will not be easily convinced to the contrary. It will take more than the hangings, the burnings, and the lynchings, both North and South, to prove it to his satisfaction. Paul Laurence Dunbar, December 18th, 1898.
Dunbar's poems also dealt with themes of personal loss and disappointment. Ironically, just as Dunbar reached the peak of his fame and popularity, his life began to fall apart. In 1898, he married the beautiful Alice Ruth Moore, a talented writer whom he had corresponded with before meeting. Deeply in love and now able to live completely off his writing, Dunbar's happiness seemed assured. But this was not to be. Dunbar developed severe tuberculosis. Despite a stay out west and in hospitals, his health steadily declined. Dunbar was also troubled by critics' unwillingness to take his poems in literary English seriously. Instead, they praised his dialect verse. Dunbar's existing drinking problem became worse as he increasingly turned to the bottle for relief. Dunbar's alcoholism and moody behavior finally destroyed his marriage. In 1902, the couple separated. He never saw his wife again.
This is the debt I pay, just for one riotous day. Years of regret and grief, sorrow without relief. Pay it I will to the end, until the grave, my friend, gives me a true release, gives me the clasp of peace. Slight was the thing I bought, small was the debt I thought. Poor was the loan at best, God, but the interest.
Lonely, exhausted, and ill, Dunbar returned to his hometown of Dayton in 1903 to live with his mother in a house he had earlier purchased for her. Dunbar's health continued to decline, although he enjoyed frequent visits from friends and admirers. On February 6, 1906, Paul Laurence Dunbar passed away. He was 33.
When all is done, say not my day is o'er, and that through night I seek a dimmer shore. Say rather that my morn has just begun. I greet the dawn and not a setting sun, when all is done.
Paul Laurence Dunbar was the first African-American writer to achieve national fame as a writer. His racial pride and efforts to capture the lives of common folk in his work inspired and influenced later black writers. His rise to prominence from humble beginnings inspired black Americans from all walks of life. Hundreds of public schools were named in his honor, along with city streets, parks, hospitals, and other institutions. Most important, his work continues to be read today by a new generation of Americans. The Dunbar Home, a National Historic Landmark, is another important legacy of the Dayton poet. After Dunbar's death, his mother, Matilda Dunbar, lived here for almost 30 years, preserving the house just as it had been when her son was alive. The state of Ohio purchased the Dunbar home in 1936 and made it a state memorial. This was the first publicly owned African-American historic site in the nation. We now invite you to tour the Dunbar House and the exhibits devoted to his life and career. Enjoy your visit.